So during the last big recession, about 10 years ago, there was a gentleman who lost his job, and he was desperate for a job. So he looked into want ads, and he saw that the only job available in his community was at the county zoo. So the next day he went and talked to the HR director. The HR director said, well, we've only got one job available. See, here's what happened. About 2 weeks ago, our gorilla passed away, and they're pretty hard to come by, and they're pretty expensive. So instead of buying a new gorilla, we decided to buy a gorilla costume, and if you'd put that on and act like a gorilla, I think everybody will buy it. And the guy says, well, I did a little drama in high school. I think, I'd probably pass that off. So the next morning, he gets the job. He gets into the dressing room, puts the gorilla costume on, and gets out in the cage, and then they open the gates, and all the parents and the kids are coming. They'd heard about the new gorilla, and the guy's going, I am going to put on a great show for these guys and see if I can pull this off. And so he starts jumping around, and he's acting like a gorilla as best he can. And believe it or not, the people start buying it. They think he's the real thing, and they're clapping. And by the end of the day, he goes, this is the career move for me. I'm going to be a gorilla the rest of my life. I love this job. Next day he comes back. He says, I'm going to put on the best show they've ever seen. He gets in the gorilla cage, and this time he gets up on a big tire swing, and he starts swinging back and forth. Well, he realizes the people are loving that. So they're clapping. The higher he goes, the more they clap and scream. And he gets so excited, he starts swinging back and forth, up and down. He swings so high, and he gets so excited that he loses his grip, and he flies right over the top of the gorilla cage, and he lands smack dab in the middle of the lion's den. Well, he got knocked out for a second, and then he woke up just in time to see 3 ferocious lions charging him, at which point he ripped off his mask and he said, why did I take this stupid job? And just about then one of the lions said, shut up or you're going to get us all fired. It's easy to be deceived, isn't it? Well, maybe not that easy, but it is easy to be deceived. And the reason is because deception hides behind masks. And we're going to talk about some of those this morning. One reason that I share these different things is because I want us to take the things that magicians use to deceive their audiences. There are certain concepts that we use, and we can apply those own concepts to our own lives, and it can help us understand and recognize deception when it comes across our paths. And when we unmask those deceptions, we'll be able to better overcome deception. But before we do that, we're going to do a little test of your short-term memory, all right? So we're going to test your short-term memory. I'm going to show you a phrase. I want you to memorize the phrase. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to memorize it, and when you do, then just lock it in your head. And here's the phrase. It's magic of the mind. I want you to lock that into your mind. Magic of the mind. Remember it, because we're going to test your short-term memory. Magic of the mind. And how many people think they got a good memory? Raise your hand. Good short-term memory. How many people think, my short-term memory is really not all that good? Raise your hands. How many people think your short-term memory is not that good? Raise your hands. I'm just trying to help you out, okay? All right, on the count of 3, we're going to say it together. Let's see how your memory is. 1, 2, 3. Very good. Magic of... Wait a minute. Did I hear something different over here? What did you see? Two thes? Magic... How many people saw 2 thes? Really? That's weird. About 10%. Well, actually, that's exactly what did happen. It was magic of the mind. It almost always happens whenever I do this, and I've been doing it for years. 10% of the audience sees the second the, and 90% don't see it. It happens almost every time. Now, there are 5 reasons why you miss the second the. Those are the 5 masks, or what I call the 5 layers of deception. Whenever I do a show, or any magician does a show, we use one or more of these concepts, these layers of deception. And again, as we understand those, we'll be able to understand a little bit better how deception works in our own lives. So here's why we miss the second the. There are 5 layers of deception, and the first one is assumptions. Okay, so when you go to a magic show, there are certain assumptions that the magician is expecting you to make, and he or she uses that to mask the deception for entertainment purposes, for all in good fun. But there are certain assumptions we make. So what was the assumption with the magic of the mind illusion? It was that there are not 2 thes back to back in the English language in a phrase in the English language. That doesn't typically happen. So you literally saw the second the. It popped into your pupil, went into your retina, hit your optic nerve into your brain, and your brain canceled it out. Why? Because it didn't make sense. So there it was, you saw it, but you didn't see it, because the assumption was that doesn't happen. Secondly, the conceal. That's pretty obvious. Magicians use things to conceal what they're going to do, but in this case, it was concealed and hidden in plain sight. It was right there. What concealed it? What concealed it was the assumption that you made that it wasn't there. And in fact, it really was there the whole time. It was right there in front of you. There are different types of concealment with magicians. There's verbal and there's physical concealment. And in this case, it was just right there in front of you. Now, I did do something to help conceal that, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. It's called reinforce. So here's what I did. You'll notice when the first time I showed that slide, what did I say? Repeatedly, I said, I want you to remember magic of the mind, magic of the mind. I said it like 3 or 4 times because I wanted you to think that's what it said, when in fact that's not at all what it said. So I was reinforcing the deception or reinforcing the illusion. Then there's the misdirection. Magicians use misdirection all the time. They don't want you to see something over here, and so they direct you over here. They don't want you to see what's in this hand, so they direct you to this hand. That's misdirection, physical misdirection. But in my case, I used some verbal misdirection. Here's what it was. When we started, before I showed you the slide, I said, let me ask you a question. Did I say, watch out, there's something odd on this next sentence you're going to see. Watch for it. Did I say that? No. What did I say we were doing? Anybody remember?
Short-term memory.
Short-term memory, exactly. I was saying we're going to test your short-term memory. Well, who wants to be wrong about that, right? So I'm misdirecting you to think, I got to memorize this thing. And then I say, here's what it is, magic of the mind. I reinforce that. So I misdirect, I reinforce, and it's concealed, and I take advantage of your assumptions. And then there is the reveal. Every magician uses that. That's the aha moment, right? That's when the magic happens, and you go, whoa, how'd that happen? Well, in this case, it was when I pointed out the second the. And suddenly, for 90% of you, something that was not seen suddenly came into view, and you went, oh yeah, there's a second the there. How did I miss that? That's called the reveal. So for the next few moments, I'm going to be actually illustrating some of these points with some illusions, and I'll be using one or more of these 5 layers as I do. Won't tell you which ones, but I'll be using at least one and sometimes more as I do these. Now, everything I do today has nothing to do with any kind of weird powers or anything like that. It is all illusion. But it may look like the real thing, when in fact, all I'm doing is using these. So let's start with assumptions. Assumptions in our own lives. We live with assumptions. We rely on assumptions. We survive on them, right? You have to make assumptions in life. Otherwise, you're running scared all day long that something might happen. For instance, you assume this roof's going to hold up for the entire service, right? You make that assumption. None of you even thought about that until just now. And a lot of you are going, you assume that the chair you're sitting on is not going to collapse. Why? Because it never has. These chairs have been solid every time you've been here. You make the assumptions that that's not going to happen. Because why? The assumptions usually are true. Usually it's the case that the chair is not going to collapse. It's the deception that's the outlier. That's why we have to be discerning. We have to be watching for the deceptions in our lives. Here's another assumption. You assume that the person you're sitting next to is the person you think they are and not an alien clone who switched bodies with the person you thought you were sitting next to. There's a guy over here going, yeah, she was acting a little weird this morning. I don't know. We make assumptions in life, and that's when we can get ourselves in trouble, when we make too many assumptions and assume that deception is not going to cross our paths. Well, here's what it says in Proverbs 2:2-4. Tune your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding or discernment. Cry out for insight and ask for understanding. Search for them as you would for silver, seeking them like hidden treasures. If you had $1 million worth of silver and you knew it was in your backyard somewhere, you would be doing everything possible to find that. You would be digging everywhere to find that. Well, God says, watch for the wisdom, seek it, ask for it, ask Him for it, right? Go after it like you would silver. Seek it like it's a hidden treasure. Why is that? Well, because He expects us to be good stewards of what He has given to us. And those of us who have had a few years in this life, we gather wisdom. And He's saying, go after it, cry after it, ask for it, dig for it. You need wisdom in your life. Why? Because we get to pass it on to others. We get to pass it on to our kids, our grandkids, our students. So how can you pass on something that you don't have? So you've got to dig for it and find that wisdom. Young people, I would say to you, I know it gets tiring. Maybe your parents, your teacher, your grandparents go, now, when I was a kid, let me tell you, listen, they've had experiences. They've been down the pathways that you are going to go down. They desperately want to keep you from having to stumble all over deceptions that are going to cross your paths. So listen to them. Find out what God's Word says about deception. There's wisdom out there, and we got to seek after it like hidden treasure, like silver that's buried in our backyards. Take parents, grandparents, take those teachable moments. We've got 5 kids. 2 of them still at home, and for all of our kids, we've always kind of watched for those teachable moments in their lives. We just kind of keep our eye out for them, and when something happens or they experience something at school, they get frustrated over something, I got like a little file cabinet in my head, and I go, you know, I had something like that happen to me. Well, here's how I handle it, or here's how I handle it, and I should not have handled it this way. Maybe you can learn from that. That's that hidden treasure. So it's not just for us to hoard and hold on to, it is for us to pass on to others as an inheritance of wisdom in their lives. Let's talk about the conceal. I'm going to need somebody's help for this next one. How about, let's see, why don't you come up and help me out? Come right up here. Hi, what's your name? Garrett? Garrett, just stand right there for me if you would. All right, Garrett, I'm going to show you and the audience one of the first tricks I ever learned. Say hi to the audience, Garrett. Say hello, Garrett. Okay, here we go. Garrett is going to be my eyes of the audience, especially for the people back there in the cheap seats, so you can see what's going on. I'm going to put the scarf down inside my hand. And Garrett, in just a moment, I'm going to have you blow on the scarf. Are you ready? Blow on the scarf. A dry blow, Garrett? That's better. It worked that time. Now, every time I do that, somebody always says, oh, you put it up your sleeve. Exactly. Put it up my sleeve. No, I didn't. I didn't put it up my sleeve. I actually put it up Garrett's sleeve. Garrett, hold your hand out like that. Yeah, it's crazy. I know. And we did not set this up ahead of time. First time we've ever met, right? Hold your hand up nice and steady. Nothing in my hands. I'm going to reach in here. And there it is inside Garrett's sleeve. There it is. Garrett, you can go back to your seat. Do a big round of applause for the amazing Garrett. Now, there are some of you in the audience who know how that trick is done because it's sold in just about every magic kit. You know, a lot of people know how it's done. And if you do, you know that there was something hidden in plain sight. It was concealed, but it takes advantage of assumption, and it takes advantage of concealment in plain sight. And so what you thought you were seeing was not exactly what you were actually seeing. And so I was able to create an illusion using these principles. So how does that work in our own lives? Well, advertising, right? Messages concealed, and I don't mean covertly concealed. I mean like right out there in front of you, but you got to be discerning and watch for them. Open happiness. Happiness, Coca-Cola, just 2 words. Everybody wants happiness. Hey, we can give it to you. Pop open a Coke and you'll be happy. Just like these folks here, they're happy, right? That's the subtle message. I mean, we laugh about it, but it's there all the time. We see that all the time. You ever seen plain-looking, ugly people in ads like this? No. Oh, yeah, actually you do sometimes. They're the poor slobs that use the competitor's product, right? Those people aren't so good looking, and they're sure not happy. But that's the subtle deception that we see in advertising all the time. Now, here's an ad I ran across that I actually love because it makes fun of that deception. It gets it right out there in front. Find out what makes you really, really ridiculously good looking. So they're actually making fun of what other advertisers use more subtly. We are the frog in the kettle. I don't know if you know the story, but supposedly if you take a kettle of lukewarm water, you put a frog in it, of course he's happy in there, you start heating it up, and it gets hotter and hotter, but the frog acclimates to it, and the frog will not jump out, and in theory, that frog will boil to death just sitting in a pot of water that it could easily have jumped out of. But that's where we are. We really are. I mean, those of you who have been around for 30 or 40 more years, you know that stuff you see on TV now all the time would have been shocking, to say the least. Not because we were a bunch of prudes, but because there was a certain decorum that was expected on most TV stations, and usually they were pretty good about keeping inappropriate stuff on their programs. But now it happens so often, it's there all the time, that we slowly cook ourselves by not watching out. That doesn't mean that we have to turn the TV off necessarily all the time, but it does mean we need to be discerning about what we're watching and discerning, careful about what we are absorbing. Because as we absorb it more and more and more, we acclimate to it. You know what I'm talking about. Whatever sin might be in your life or in our lives, and the more we do it, the less convicting it becomes. And after a while, it's like, I don't feel quite as bad about it as I used to, right? Because we are the frog in the kettle. So here's what it says in Romans chapter 12. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you'll learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. But how do you do that? Well, there's an answer to that. It's in Hebrews chapter 5. Solid spiritual food is for those who are mature, who through training have the skill to recognize the difference between right and wrong, or you might say the skill to recognize between truth and deception, right? What's it take? It takes training. It doesn't happen automatically. Now, you know anything about the Hebrews? The writer of Hebrews was chiding the Hebrew Christians because they were kind of immature as Christians. And he was saying, by now you really ought to be off the milk of the word, and you really ought to be more on the solid food. And Jeff mentioned a song that I wrote, believe it or not, 40 years ago, that Amy Grant picked up, and it was all about Hebrews chapter 5. It says, I know a man, maybe you know him too. You never can tell, he might even be you. He knelt at the altar, and that was the end. He's saved, and that's all that matters to him. His spiritual tummy can't take too much. One day a week, he gets his spiritual lunch. On Sunday, he puts on his spiritual best and gives his language a spiritual rest. He's just a fat little baby. He wants his bottle, and he don't mean maybe. He sampled solid food once or twice, but he says doctrine leaves him cold as ice. He's been baptized, sanctified, redeemed by the blood, but his daily devotions are stuck in the mud. He knows the books of the Bible, John 3:16. He's got the biggest King James you've ever seen. I've always wondered if he'll grow up someday. He's mama's boy, and he likes it that way. If you happen to see him, tell him I said, he'll never grow if he never gets fed. And I wrote that song about me as much as I wrote it about anybody else. But that's Hebrews 5. We need to mature as Christians if we're going to discern truth from deception. And speaking of deception, here's what John MacArthur said about counterfeit bills. Federal agents don't learn to spot counterfeit money by studying the counterfeits. They study genuine bills until they master the look of the real thing. Then, when they see the bogus money, they recognize it. So they don't study deception so much as they study truth. Isn't that the way it is in our lives? The more we study truth, the more we absorb truth into our lives, the more we're able to see deception for what it is. Dan Coram was years ago a world-class magician. He now is a profiler for corporations, federal agencies, churches. He comes in and he teaches ways of profiling people so that you can be careful about somebody who might be what they call a bad actor, or somebody who's going to cause you some serious trouble. He's very good at discerning people from the very beginning, like through an interview and that type of thing. So I asked Dan one time, because he's done a lot of debunking of deception like psychics and that type of thing. And I asked him one time, I said, what is it that causes people to fall into deception? What's that personality type? He said the most difficult person to deceive is the one who loves the truth more than they fear their pain. That was profound. I wrote that down like 20 years ago, and I never forgot it. The most difficult person to deceive is the one who loves the truth more than they fear their pain. Pain as a way of throwing us into deception, of wooing us into deception. Because if you've ever been in severe emotional pain, physical pain, you can get to the point where you are willing to do just about anything to get rid of it, to soothe that pain, to make it go away. And that's when we open ourselves to deception, unless we love the truth more than we fear our pain. I'll give you an example. It's from in my book. I did an investigation several years ago at a place called Camp Chesterfield. Camp Chesterfield is for over 100 years, has been a gathering place for psychic mediums, okay, those who supposedly contact the other side. And it is absolutely packed with deception. So I went to one of their services. It was a little white chapel right there on their grounds. They sang hymns that some of us grew up with. You would think you were just in a regular little country church. And then the special speaker got up. And she started to do, I'll give it to you briefly, but essentially she had her eyes covered with coins taped over, a blindfold around us, so there was absolutely no way she could see. Then she took notes that were folded up from the audience that they had written down saying, I want to contact my beloved father who passed away. And she would divine what was in those notes. And she was able to successfully do that. She literally had the woman in front of me in tears because she supposedly contacted her father. Because why? That woman was in pain. She desperately wanted to hear from her father. And yet, that speaker was using a magic trick that I had seen the night before in Detroit at a magic show for entertainment purposes. The same trick used for entertainment was now being used to draw somebody into deception when they were vulnerable because they were in pain. And this person, the speaker, took advantage of that fact. Now, I had written down on a note that I wanted to hear from my childhood friend named Candy, and I talk about this in the book. And so I folded it up, put it in, and sure enough, she picked up mine, and she said, somebody here who is trying to contact a childhood friend named Candy. Is that correct? And I said, yeah, that's me. And she said, well, Candy wants you to know, and then she gave a little message from Candy, right? Well, what she didn't know was Candy was my dog when I was a kid, and Candy was not nearly that articulate when she was on Earth. But it just went to show, hey, you know what? It's fakery. And they're taking advantage of people who were in pain and deceived them because the people were trying to get rid of that pain, and they frankly did not love the truth. Maybe they didn't even know the truth more than they feared their pain. Reinforce. I'm going to talk about that here in just a second, but you know what? I'm going to do something with, I need a lady to come up and help me out. I need like a young lady, 20 years old or more. Yeah, would you come on up, please? Hi, what's your name?
Jesse.
Jesse, hi Jesse, I'm Rod. I'm going to have you help me out. And it's important that the audience knows that I have not told you what to do or what you say or anything. In fact, we've never met before, is that correct?
Yes.
You seem kind of proud of that for some reason, but...
You're thinking, why did I raise my hand?
Yeah, she's like, what did I do this for? I'm not going to make fun of you. I'll make it real easy. Just step right over here. Just right there. There's a trap door there. There, good. All right. I'm going to show you what is called the idiomotor response. It's a real thing, and it has actually been used to deceive people into believing in psychic powers, but I'm going to show you how it works. If you take a pendulum and you drop it from a string, if you think circle, 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 and you really focus on that, there will be a slight muscular response in your tips of your fingers, accentuated by the string, that'll make it go around in a circle. It's called the idiomotor response. It's not a weird psychic thing. It's just the way our bodies work. And I'm going to show you how it works with the skeleton key. So, Jesse, if you would put your hand on my wrist. And I want you to just grab my wrist. And then I want you to think. We're both going to concentrate on one word, and it is turn. So concentrate on the word turn. This sometimes takes a little while. It takes a little bit of concentration. So really focus on that word turn, Jesse. And those of you in the front can probably see that it is beginning to turn. Very slowly. But her focusing on that is helping my focus, which is we're both focusing on the same word, turn. And there it goes. Like that. Now, it's not like a magic key or anything. It's not mechanical. It's actually, just a regular skeleton key. So, Jesse, if you would walk right around here, I'm going to have you help me out with something else. We're going to use the idiomotor response a little bit differently this time. I have a die, 6 sides. You're familiar with these, I'm sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I want you to take that. I'm going to turn my back. I want you to turn it face up so any one of the 5 sets of dots are turning face up. And then when you finish with that, put this cup on top of it so I can't see it. Tell me when you're done. Okay? What I want you to do is put your left hand up like that for me. I want you to imagine that this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and your palm will be 6. Okay? So I'm going to snap my hand. Hold your fingers out just a little bit. When I snap my fingers, I want you to imagine that whatever number you've got up, you see that number on the back of the fingernail or in the back of your hand. If it's number 6, it would be on the back of your hand. Ready? And I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to snap, but when I do, I want you to think of that. Ready? I'm getting a slight response right here. Was it 3? Okay, good. Okay, let's try it again. Turn it over. You can turn it to any number you want. Okay, you got it? Hand up. Ready? Thumb. Was it 6? Okay, let's try it one more time.
Good.
Got it? All right. I'll tell you what, let's do it a little differently. I want you to look at me this time. I'm going to count to 1 through 6. Don't try to respond, okay? I just want to see your eyes. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got just the slightest little glimmer when I said 1. Was it 1? Okay, we got that. All right, thanks so much. You can go back to your seat. Thank you. Sometimes I miss it by about 1. So deception is repeated. When deception is repeated, it tends to be strengthened in our lives. King Solomon, 3,000 years ago, built a temple to the Lord. He was the wisest man in the world. He was rich beyond measure, famous. He was on top of the world. He builds this temple for God. And God, instead of saying, thank you so much, God says, warning, be careful, because you may be ready to fall into deception. So instead of patting Solomon on the back, God says, be careful. Why is that? Because when we're on top of the world, it's easy for us to feel really great about ourselves, which is nothing wrong with that, but we can get complacent. And we can go, I deserve this. I deserve this little deception. I know it's deceiving, but I deserve it because I'm feeling good about myself here, right? Well, that's exactly what happened with Solomon. Solomon, even though he was warned by God, don't take wives from the foreign nations because they are serving false gods. But he did it anyway. And talk about repeating a deception. He did it 1,000 times. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. The wisest man in the world just became the stupidest man in the world. 1 Kings chapter 11, the wisest man in the world becomes a fool by reinforcing his own deceptions. So what happened with him? He went from the guy who built a temple to honor his God to a man who served other gods, built altars to false gods. One of them was a false god by the name of Moloch, who was the god of the Ammonites. Moloch was placated by sacrificing children. So here's the wisest man in the world, because he allowed sin and deception to be reinforced in his mind and his life over and over again, went from being a man who honored God to a man who honored a false god and in fact sacrificed children to that. If it can happen to the wisest man in the world, it can happen to us. Now, let's talk about misdirection. I'm going to show you a little example of that, and I will need 3 people from the audience to help me out with this. I need adults for this one. I'm so sorry. I need you, if you would, and you can come on up. You're what, about 14, 15 years old? Oh, pardon? 15? That'll work. Come on up here. And I need somebody else. Okay, the gentleman in the striped shirt back there. Would you mind coming up and helping me? You're the only one with a striped shirt. I'm sorry. Yeah, come on up here. All right, step right over here if you would. This is a book called The Da Vinci Code. I don't know if any of you have read it, but if you remember when it came out about 15, 20 years ago, it was very, very deceiving. It's a novel, but it claimed that everything in here actually it says right at the beginning. This is the misdirection from this book. In this book, he says, all descriptions of artwork, architecture, documents, and secret rituals in this novel are accurate, when in fact they were not at all. But he goes on to suggest that Jesus never rose from the dead, that Jesus wasn't who he said he was, and it is filled with absolute lies, and yet a lot of people were led astray by this very book. So I thought this would be an interesting way to introduce misdirection, which is actually what Dan Brown, the author, did in the beginning of the book. So I'd like each one of you, and your name, please? Alyssa, I want you to open the book, any page you want, and choose a difficult word. Choose one that's maybe 11, 12, 13 letters, something that's going to be hard for me, okay? Not an easy one. Nice, long, tough word for me. And when you've got one, close the book and hand it down to your name? Danny. All right, you got one? Okay. Danny, open the book. You can close it. Open to any page you want. All right. There you go. choose a tough one, not an easy one. You got one? I'm so glad you brought those, Danny. Okay, choose a tough one. Yeah, 11, 12, 13 letters long, something's going to be difficult. You got one? Okay, well, we've got all afternoon. Yeah, you got one. Good. Okay, pass it down to Rich. Rich, would you do the same thing? Grab a tough word in there. While you're doing that, we're going to play a little game here with the audience. Do you have one, Rich? Very good. Okay. Remember those words, all three of them. I want everybody here to think of one letter in the alphabet. Everybody here, think one letter of the alphabet. And Alyssa, your word started with what? A. And how about yours?
B.
B. Oh boy, that's not writing too well. And? U. A, B, and U. You can't read this, but it is, believe it or not, A, B, and U. How many people here were thinking of A, B, or U? Can I see your hands? Okay, a few people. And probably because A, B were one of the first ones you would tend to think of. The chances of getting any one of these right is 1 chance in 8, because you got 26 letters in the alphabet. You get one shot at it, 1 in 8. The chances, however, had I said, I want you to think of 2 letters, if you would have gotten A, B, or U, would be 1 chance in 325. So it goes up exponentially. If I had said, think of 3 letters, and somebody here got A, B, and U, the chances of that happening are only 1 in 2,600, because that's nearly impossible. However, how tough would it be for anybody to get one word, let alone the, thank you, I'll go ahead and write that down. What are the chances that one person would get one word, let alone 2 or 3? Well, that's why I bring 3 people up with me, because I'm going to see if I can get at least one of these words by just asking you some simple questions. So I'll start with you, Alyssa, right? I want you to think of, every one of you, to think of your word, and if it is a concrete word, something in other words you can feel, I want you to try to feel it. I want you to experience it. If it is more of an abstract word, I want you to think about how it makes you feel. Usually it will evoke some sort of feeling, or you can just think of it in an abstract way. So let me start with you, Elisa. The word you're thinking of is, what I'm getting here is, I don't know why, but forgetfulness for some reason. It's not the word, but it does have something to do with forgetfulness in some way. That's what I was thinking. And right over here, light. But it's not the word light, but it has... This is something, what I'm getting over here is something that you don't even want to think about. It's almost scary. Let me see. I don't know. I'm going to give it a shot. I usually get 1. Let me see if I can get 2 or 3. Absent-mindedly, brilliantly, unthinkable. Did I get all 3? Thank you. You can go back to your seats. Thank you so much. Now, I use, like I said, everything I do, no special powers, nothing weird. I'm using 1 or more of these concepts. In this case, I was using some misdirection. Most often manifested when we allow ourselves to be distracted from the truth towards something of much less value. That happens in our own lives, doesn't it? We are misdirected. When deception comes along, we are quite often misdirected toward it. But how about this? How about if we were to say, God, misdirect me from the deception and to your truth? Here's what it says in Psalm 119. Turn my eyes from worthless things and give me life through your word. That's asking God to misdirect you from worthless things toward things that really last. David Cassidy, remember him? If you're over 50, maybe, you probably remember him. He sang, I think I love you, right? Wasn't that a great song? Partridge Family, right? He was on top of the world. He died just a few months ago. His daughter said his last words were so much wasted time. The last words that came out of his lips. And I would challenge myself, I challenge you, are those the last words you want to come out of your lips? Or would you rather hear from the lips of Jesus, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. Here's Jim Carrey. Talk about somebody on top of the world worth $150 million. Funny as anything. Great actor. But here's what he said. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it is not the answer. And it's not. And we need to listen to somebody like this, even though I don't think, from everything I've seen, from the documentaries I've watched and what I've read, I don't think Jim's found the answer. But at least he knows it ain't that. And it is so easy for us to be sucked into deception when we look at somebody, a celebrity, and we think, man, if I could just be like that person. If I could just have $1 million, let alone 100 million, 150 million, I'd be happy. He's warning you. No, that's not going to give you happiness. That's deception, is what he's saying. For if anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of every person's work. So what we do with what he gives us, whether that's that wisdom, remember that silver that we talked about? The wisdom God gives us, whether it's that kind of silver metaphorically, or if it is literal silver, literal money, literal whatever he has given to us, he expects us to be good stewards and not be distracted with deceptions in our lives because we're trying to soothe something, whether it's pain or whatever it is. We're trying to use that to get rid of that feeling of inadequacy or that feeling of fear or pain. Here's what we need to be investing in. These are metaphors for the stuff that's going to last. What is that in real life? Investing in people, right? Whether that's your kids, your grandkids. And I don't mean just money. I'm not saying buy them stuff. I'm saying the wisdom. Pass on the wisdom of God's word. Pass on the wisdom that you've accumulated in your own life. Help them see when that deception is going to come along their path so they can avoid being deceived in their lives. That's what's going to last. What's not going to last? Stuff. That's what wood, hay, or straw is. That's the metaphor for it in the Bible. It's just stuff that isn't worth anything. I mean, it's all going to burn up, right? I mean, trust me, I look at stuff that I've bought. Okay, confession. I got a drawer full of magic tricks I've never used. I know. I don't even want to know why I spent on them, right? Because I go, ooh, that'll make me happy, that'll make me better, I'll be better on stage if I do that. And then I go, not as good as I thought it was. And I've wasted, man, I have. I see stuff that I've purchased and I go, boy, if I would have done something, give it to an orphanage, something, that would have taken what I spent on wood, hay, and straw and turned it into gold, silver, or costly stones. If what's been built survives, the builder will receive a great reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. So it's not saying our salvation is based upon what we do with God's resources, but it is saying the good stuff that you do with God's resources, it's going to last. In what way? I don't know, but it does say you're going to be rewarded for it. Well done, good and faithful servant. Remember that from Jesus' parable. And then finally, there's the reveal. That's the fifth layer that we've talked about. That's when we become aware of the power of deception in our lives and choose the path of deception or the path of truth. Do you remember the magic of the mind illusion? When suddenly 90% of you saw a second that you did not see before. That's that aha moment. That's the aha moment of a magic or of an illusion, right? when we become aware of the power of deception in our lives and choose the path of deception or the path of truth. There's something that happened when Jesus was here on earth at the pool of Siloam. They recently discovered this. I actually did a teaching here with a tour group one time. I'm literally standing right here telling this story about Jesus healing the blind man right where it happened. That was so cool. This is an artist's rendition of what it probably looked like 2,000 years ago. So here's the story. Jesus sees a blind man and he heals him by putting mud on his eyes. Why he did it that way, I don't know. Maybe there was some reason he did that so it would be memorable. But he said, now go down into this pool of Siloam and wash your eyes, which he did. Somebody led him down there, and he washed, and he could suddenly see. He had been blind since birth. Along come the Pharisees, and they tried to trip him up. Well, who did this for you? Is he from God, or is he from the devil? And the guy's like, really? Okay, I'm paraphrasing. He probably didn't say, really? But he said, he just opened my eyes, and you're asking that question? All I know is I was blind and now I can see. And then they come back and they ask him again, yeah, well, who did this? Come on, really? And then he gets smart with him. He goes, oh, you're asking again. I guess maybe you want to follow him. Is that it? So this guy was risking being tossed out of the synagogue by bad mouth and their back talking. The Pharisees, they even asked his parents, and his parents threw him under the bus and said, don't ask us, we don't know, ask him. Because he knew he had had that aha moment in his life, and he was like, no, this is real. This is something incredible that happened to me. I don't care what you say. I know what happened to me. I just had an aha moment in my life. So Jesus comes along, and he sees him again, and he says, do you believe? The guy goes, yeah, I believe. Jesus says, I entered into this world to give sight to the blind and to show those who think that they see that they are blind. We have our aha moments in our lives. Every day we get them. Now, it could be that God healed you of something, because it happens. He does. He chooses to heal some people. And when it does, man, that's an incredible aha moment. You remember for the rest of your life, and it probably radically changed your life. Or maybe he healed a marriage. Or maybe you're still waiting for that aha moment. But every one of us get our aha moments, even if it's something as mundane as, wow, I'm finally seeing that I don't need to live in fear. I can live in liberty. I can live in trust and faith. That's an aha moment. The difference is not whether we are going to have or have our aha moments. The only question remaining is, what will you do with your aha moment or moments? Will you continue, and I say this to myself as well, will we continue to walk as blind men? Or will we open our eyes to what he is showing us and say, I believe? Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. I want to ask you to stay up here for just a second. Come on up here with me, man. I hope you all enjoyed that. As we're talking about faith, being full of it, it's fun to look at the other side and say, maybe this isn't real. I want to ask you something, though, first. I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, how'd you do all that?
Pretty well.
Can I just say, you're just a fat little baby. Okay. I have a couple questions there. It's right here on your book cover. And by the way, it's a great book. We're not here just promoting his book by any means. I've read it. It's very good. It's very powerful. And I would really encourage you, if you or someone you know really is dealing with fear or you feel like living in deception, this is really going to be helpful. But on the back, there's even a few questions that you deal with. And you just did this illusion up here. Is it really possible for humans to read minds?
All three of the authors, one of them is Dr. Toby Travis, who was a touring illusionist for many, many years all over the world. Ironically enough, he landed back here in Tucson about a year ago. He's the headmaster at Desert Christian Schools now. He was at one time a world-renowned illusionist. The other one is Adrian Van Vactor, who is a world-renowned illusionist who also lives here in Tucson. All three of us have done a lot of research on this type of thing, which we talk about in the book. But we really wanted to ask the question, is some of it real? Well, a quick illustration, there have been prizes offered to anybody who can prove that they really can read minds. One of them was a $1 million prize by a guy named James Randi. The other one was, I think, a $25,000 prize offered by Andre Cole, who is a world-famous illusionist and a Christian. And they said, if you can come, you say you've got powers, fine, come. We will test you under test conditions as magicians to see if you're faking it. And in the many, many years that they've offered this, nobody's been able to claim it because they've always been able to say, no, here's how you did it. And we actually reveal some of those tricks, quite a few of them actually, in the book to show that those who are claiming these types of things are purely deceiving people. And millions of people are being sucked into that.
And the enemy would love for us to do that. That's why
Sure.
you're here alive. We're like, we will point you to the truth of Jesus. There's the questions on here. I just love them. One of them, I didn't ask you in the last service, but I saw this. How do psychics get their secret information? Because I know people that buy into that versus the reality of the truth of Jesus.
Well, today with the internet, you can find just about anything you want. In fact, I know of a guy who has done that. He's literally got it on the internet before his performance as a psychic and look people up. There's another technique, that's called hot reading, by the way. There's another technique called cold reading that most of them use. If you've seen Jonathan Edward, Sylvia Brown, some of the others, you'll notice they ask leading questions and they pull information out, repeat it back. It's a whole technique called cold reading, which we have a whole chapter in there about this. But it literally, if the person is vulnerable and they're open to believing the lie, they will get sucked right into it. Oh my gosh, how did she know that? And sometimes it's hot reading, sometimes it's cold reading, but it's always very effective.
This always gets back to our own pain, doesn't it?
It really does.
And really the way the pain is healed is to take it to Jesus, not to just go to something that's an illusion. The last one I want you to just really spend a minute on is, could the miracles of Jesus been an illusion?
Mm-hmm. That was a question that Adrian Van Vactor, my co-author, asked as he was a new Christian, very talented, international award-winning illusionist, and he became a Christian. He was actually led to the Lord by a friend here in Tucson, another illusionist. And Adrian, as a young Christian, said, I need to make sure that what I'm believing, what I say I believe is the real thing. And so he went about a several-year investigation as a magician, as a talented magician who knows all the tricks, and he applied them to the miracles of Jesus. And the last section of the book is about his faith journey and how through asking these questions as a magician, he was able to answer them. Was Jesus a myth? Was he a magician, or was he the Messiah? And he determined, yeah, he is who he said he is, and he is a Messiah. And now Adrian travels the world as an apologist and performing, but sharing the gospel and sharing the truth of God's word with literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
And if you don't know, an apologist is someone who just defends the faith and proves it.
Yeah.
Proves it. So, hey, Rod, thank you so much. Did you guys enjoy?
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
So stop by and get to know Rod out in the back there. He would love to meet you. And check out his book. Guys, listen, thank you so much for being here. I want to spend a minute just praying with us here at the end. And I'm going to ask you to do something this week. We always talk about a next step. And I want you to just challenge you to memorize. If you haven't memorized this key verse, Romans 12:2, God transforms us by changing the way we think. And let's get our thoughts in line with His Word, the Bible. That's what He wants us to do, to begin to think more like Him, so that we will not live in fear or deception. Would you pray with me for a few minutes? Lord, thank you for this time we have together. And I just pray over these next few moments, would you speak to our hearts? As we're praying, if you're a person who you've never made a decision to follow Jesus, and you say, oh, I sense from this gathering, whether you're here or online, you say, I see that Jesus is the truth. I'm ready to put my faith in Him. just pray this prayer with us. It's a simple first step in this journey. Say, Lord Jesus, I'm putting my faith in you. Forgive me my sin. Remove the deception from my life and help me to see you as truth from this moment on. Let me begin a faith journey with you. As we're praying, I realize there are a lot of you who are followers of Jesus that were here today. And a lot of you are saying, you know what, I really deal with fear. Or maybe there's areas of deception in your life. We've had some people really come to the place of being set free of fear this weekend. And if that's you, maybe you realize the fear that you're living with is the enemy deceiving you. Would you just give God that fear right now? Just say, Lord Jesus, I give you that fear. Set me free of that fear. Help me to live in faith, to be full of faith in you. In Jesus' name, amen.